Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you indeed. Lovely to be here and to come from Slough to tell you about it. But I must first say that it isn't just me, and in fact it isn't mainly me. Our gang down here, can you just wave so everybody can see? There's not just my own name on here. I'm a medical psychotherapist, which really means, because I'm nearly retired, I'm a grumpy old psychiatrist who's very unhappy about the way things have been. So we've tried to set up something different in Slough over the last few years, and I'm going to tell you a bit about it. And then this afternoon we're going to have a workshop where you can discuss it a bit more with us all. And it fits in very much with what we've been hearing so far this morning. So it's another reason that it's great to be here and part of this, I think, part of a wider movement for change and having to do things differently in mental health. So we've got Sharon with us, we've got Tony, and we've got Caroline. So we came across on the plane last night, and I must say, I want a round of applause for somebody whose first ever plane journey came over here. So Sharon, well done, you made it on the plane. And we had a great time, actually. The landing was a bit bumpy, but apart from that, everything was just fine. So now let me work out how this thing works. Isle of Man, yeah, that's today, that's Quing, that's us. And yes, now this is a Prezi presentation, which means it zooms around the different places, not quite the same as PowerPoint. Now, I'm talking to you a little bit about therapeutic communities. I'm going to give a little bit of history first, and then I'm going to give a bit of geography, and then I'm going to tell you what we do in Slough. So this is the history. Most doctors and people think these clever men from the wartime years invented therapeutic communities. That's Tom Main and Bion and Maxwell Jones, if you know about these things. But I think, no, actually, they only invented a certain type of therapeutic community, the ones that happened in hospitals. If you go back a bit further, you come to William Tuke. Now, that's at the end of just before the 1800s. And this was at the Retreat, which was a Quaker hospital in York. And they developed this idea of moral treatment. And moral treatment is basically treating people as human beings rather than locking them up and chaining them up and forgetting all about them. And so I'd say, in fact, therapeutic communities and the ideas that go into therapeutic communities came long before the 1940s. But then you look even further and say, actually, it was even before the Quakers came along and did it. It was perhaps her. This is St. Dympna. She's the patron saint of mental health and all sorts of other things. And she has a shrine that people used to go and worship in Belgium. And if they worshipped there, they were looked after by the people of the town if they couldn't cope with themselves. And they were part of the agricultural community, and they absolutely had a real part of belonging in the whole community there. And that model actually continues to this day, where they still have people boarding out in the town as part of a therapeutic community. And that started in mid-1300s, really. But it goes back even further than that, if you look at it. And this is the nasty bit of the story now. This is, I can't remember his name offhand, but he's a nasty Irish king who killed his daughter, Dympna, in a fit of rage and anger about his wife dying and all sorts of other things. So in a way, that was a classic example of really, really early mental disturbance. And so she became the patron saint. So the history goes back a very, very long way. And by saying that, I'm not saying it's particularly therapeutic communities, but it's a human attribute to just be normal and communicate with each other and belong to different groups of people and just it's just centered on relationship, people having relationships within which they feel more supported. Very much what Jackie was talking to us just now about the sort of buffers. And it goes back forever, really. And so therapeutic communities, in one sense, aren't a magical special treatment that does anything different. They're something that actually just builds on normal human relationships that have always been there in a healthy way. Again, very much the asset-based stuff we were talking about earlier, and something that's fundamentally ordinary and human, and how we can use that for our services. So that's what we're going to tell you now about Slough. So this was Geel, and as I say, 1329 is when people started going there to worship at the shrine of St. Dympna in Belgium, and this is the geography lesson now. So there's Geel, just over the North Sea. And if the next bit, and then this idea about therapeutic communities through the Quakers there in York and all sorts of other places, Birmingham, the experiments in the war, down to other places in Europe, right across the world. Hang on, there's a few more to come yet. And then this one, which is Slough 2013, which is when we started our project there, which is what I'm now going to tell you about. Here is Slough. We zoomed into Slough. It's just on the right there is Heathrow Airport and a bit further to London. And then the rest of Berkshire is over here and Oxford's up in the top left there. So that's where we are. And just a couple of, well, hang on. This isn't doing it as it should. Just a minute. Let's go back. These are a few pictures to show you what Slough looks like in a minute. So it's not just like the office or like John Betchman said. Right, there we are. Just to say, it's a population of about 150,000, and Jeff, our manager at our service, he's very proud to say that actually it's 20,000 more than that, because if you measure the sewage coming out of the town, it shows there's a lot of people hidden, which is also a measure of how deprived the town is, because if you do the indexes of deprivation that we were hearing about earlier, it does come, it's pretty much deprived. It's more like a London borough than a nice leafy home counties sort of area. But again, we're not talking about deficit model here, we're talking about an asset-based model. So the fact we're very ethnically diverse in Slough, we see very much as an asset. So, where are we going to? Sorry, this isn't quite going as I wanted. Been to there. Okay, so here's the main shopping centre, some sort of musical activity there, just to show you around the place a little bit. I've got 3 or 4 pictures here, if the thing works. Okay, here's the different faiths. This is the mosque. That's right, up the Farnham Road. Is Farnham Road? Is it? Yeah. And then there's. So this is going a little bit slowly. This is the Hindu temple and all the sort of bright colours of that. A lot of Sikh people as well, this is some sort of celebration there. And then we go to. There's a big Polish community in Slough. There's a wedding there and sort of various children's do's and some beautiful church windows. Then there are nice parts of Slough, unlike John Betchman would have it, or who's that fellow out of The Office? That's the other thing people know about. So Ricky Gervais, yes, that's the other people of Slough. So there's one of the parks that's just near the hospital we based at. And here's the futuristic library, where we often have events there for sort of putting out mental health messages to people and sort of collaborating with the town. And this is the place, until recently, where we held our group that we're going to tell you about. This is, again, Quakers. I've noticed Quakers are on the back of the programme as one of the sponsors, a very sort of socially aware organisation that I think very much in keeping with these ideas. So that's quite a friends meeting house with Natasha, our team leader, who wasn't able to be with us today, but she's the person who's held this programme together. So just tell you a few bits about it. What's happened in therapeutic communities in the UK, very potted version, over the last 20 years, is they used to be residential where people stayed 24/7, then they got cut down so people didn't stay at weekends, then they got cut down more so they were non-residential 5 days a week, then they were cut down even more. This is mostly by sort of funding and commissioning processes in the NHS. They got cut down even more so they were perhaps 2 or 3 days a week. And then there are several now up in Oxfordshire near us and up in Lancashire and Yorkshire that are just 1 day a week. And so we decided to make the most tiny one possible in Slough. And we're doing 2.5 hours a week, which is every Tuesday, which is called the Embrace Group. And the Embrace Group, it isn't just that we meet for the 2.5 hours a week. That's the hub of the whole lot, as it were. But outside, beyond that, there's all sorts of other things in the town that it joins up with. So the whole town becomes the therapeutic community. That's the idea of it, really. And you'll hear more about it all and how the people work in it and all our co-production if you come to our workshop this afternoon. But basically, that 2.5 hours a week, there's 4 phases as people come in, building trust, making it feel safe for people. And then the next is more sort of working towards distinct goals, helping out with others, becoming buddies, and then transition into a senior membership after a year or so. And then in the phase 4, it's really getting ready for getting a life worth living afterwards and moving on into peer mentoring, which is something that's been developed with our local recovery college, and the people with us today are peer mentors who've been through that and are really understand it from the inside. So What am I going to show you next? Oh yes, okay, just a couple of slides to show you that this is it has good outcomes. Everything has to show its outcomes nowadays in order to survive. And I think we are really treading a line very closely between having to do the sort of NHS stuff to be able to carry on, but actually using a sort of attitude and approach that's very alien to most of the NHS. So it's a sort of quite a tension we have to live. But part of it is having to collect these sort of measures. And so I'll just show you, I think I've just shown you one on this slideshow when it comes up. Okay, yep. So this is in the year before people came. I think this is the first year or two of the program running. For the people in the program, the cost for hospital beds was £1.5 million. And then in the year after treatment, it was just less than a tenth of that, less than a 15th of that, £101,000. So in other words, people didn't need to go into hospital beds anything like as much afterwards. We've got all sorts of other measures as well to show improvement. So this is the sort of thing the commissioners and the managers like to see, to say, oh yes, that service is worth doing. I think there's one more here that's about actually people feeling better. So I don't know if you know CORE, the measure. It's about how depressed, how anxious, how well-adjusted people feel. And again, the higher score is the bad one. So the more symptoms you have is a higher one. And so people feel a lot better after they've been through the program. So in those terms, it's a successful. But in a way, it's not those things that matter so much to us. It's how people experience it. So these are a couple of slides about how people have felt about it and what they say about it. I experienced severe low mood along with not wanting to be alive. I worked up each day feeling disappointed that I was alive. That's the sort of thing that people say when they come into it. And the next slide is about how people felt they'd changed. So here's one of those. Somebody was very moved by feeling that they'd been told they'd made a difference to somebody else's life. Again, this is pure asset-based things. People get a lot out of being able to help each other as well as getting help for themselves in this program. Next one, I've got 4 of these, I think. It's going a bit slowly. So how the program supported people with this, and I think it zooms into one of them. It gave me the opportunity to believe I'm worthwhile and valued by allowing me to co-produce services in the NHS, other services outside the group itself, across the town. And so here we go. And what I would like to say to the group, it's helped me to understand my own mental health issues and be aware of other people's needs. Mental illness isn't just an illness, it's an octopus, and it has many arms to it, affecting so many things. I love that idea of an octopus with its tentacles getting all over the place. So those are some of the things that people have said once they've been through our program. Last one of these things that's happened, the CQC, which I don't think you have in the Northern Ireland, but anybody from England will know about the CQC. They thought that there was a very valuable service, particularly the way in which the patient's voice was heard. So CQC is usually seen as a sort of rather oppressive organisation that comes and inspects you and people get frightened about it. But in fact, they recognised that the patient's voice being heard was a very positive thing, which makes me feel a little warmer towards the CQC than I did before, because they are noticing something that matters rather than just sort of measuring the size of the rooms or the fire alarms and things like that. Okay. Yeah, okay, so one of the key principles we go on behind all this is we say what we're doing is not procedural practice, we're not following a manual, and we're not doing a simple therapy where there's definite steps to do, like cognitive behavioural therapy. We're doing relational practice, so the relationships matter rather than the procedures. And that applies at all levels, so it's not just relationships between us as staff and members of our groups, it's between members of the groups, it's between us as staff and the commissioners and the managers and the other organisations in the town. All the relationships are part of the work we have to do, is to build those relationships into a whole system. And Jeff, our manager, who thankfully believes in this way of working, he supports that, us doing it locally and clinically, but he does it very strongly with the local council. So the council and the NHS are working together in a way that's not usually possible. So here's the map of everybody working together, and all these sort of relationships within the area of Slough. I'll just take you to the four corners of it. This is the NHS bit, where they have co-production workshops, sort of peer mentoring, the Embrace group, which is the one I've been talking about, all sorts of other things happening as part of the NHS part of it. Then if we move on to the council side, this isn't playing very well. Let me just see if I can get back. No. Okay, that was my last slide, which somehow jumped to. So I'll just try and fill in the gap while I'm by saying about it. So there's the council side, which is the Recovery College, which is the various social services input into health, which is very much coordinated. The voluntary sector, which includes Hope House, which is a residential facility for people coming who've been out of Berkshire, sent away on sort of expensive contracts with private hospitals. So people sometimes come back to that through it. So again, it's an economic saving as well as a much nicer sort of therapeutic sort of setting for people to be in. Another thing in the voluntary sector is a thing called Growing Better Lives, which is our green care project, which is we have therapy groups. It's stopped for the moment, but once a week we have therapy groups in a yurt, which is in an environment centre. So we grow things, we eat them, and it's sort of part of bringing nature as part of the therapeutic programme, which has been an important thing. And there's several other things scattered around the town that people can make into their programme. So although our Embrace group only meets on the Tuesdays for 2.5 hours, there's all sorts of other things, and people can make a whole programme for the different things going on in the week in order to receive the sort of therapeutic input they need. Now, what else was I going to say? And in the future, this isn't a fixed thing. That is how it is. It's developing other links. So we may well develop links with probation services locally, with social services, with domestic violence services. All sorts of other organisations in the area can be sort of part of this network of services that work in a therapeutic community way and make the therapeutic community, as it were, exist across the whole town rather than just in one building or one simple group programme. So that's what we're up to. And the last slide was to show that we've done it in Slough now, and I think you're up to something similar here in next year in the Isle of Man. And that's the point I was going to finish and say thank you very much.